Our top story tonight, well, Donald Trump has dropped a tariff bombshell. Well, just weeks before he takes oath as US president yet again, Donald Trump plans to impose sweeping tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, and Canada, and that too on day one of his presidency. In fact, in a social media post, Trump said that this is his first of the many executive orders on January 20th, and this would be to impose tariffs, which is a 25% tariff on all goods that are coming in from Mexico and Canada, and an additional 10% tariffs on China. Remember, even during his campaigning, Donald Trump had threatened tariffs of 60% on Chinese goods. In fact, the financial markets reacted immediately after that post came out. The Canadian dollar, Mexican peso, and Chinese yuan edged lower, and traders across the world are bracing for even more volatility. Now, the big question then is slapping off such high tariffs prudent to protect American interests, and how will it really impact the global economy? Well, to discuss those and many more points forward, I'm now joined by a panel of experts. Well, Rajat Nag, Distinguished Fellow NCAER, Jayan Das Gupta, former ambassador and representative of India to the WTO, and Ashok Sajjan, former ambassador. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on ET Now to discuss the big story. Let me come to you first, Mr. Das Gupta. Now, this is not really a surprise given Donald's love for tariffs, trumps most things, and pun intended. Is this a negotiating gambit by him, or does he actually want to impose tariffs?
Well, the first thing is that Trump had negotiated the US Mexico Canada agreement, and which replaced NAFTA. And that is going to run out in 2026. So this could very well be one of the gambits that he is indulging in to force Canada and Mexico to renegotiate the US MCA before its scheduled expiry in 2026, and then get more favorable terms. The second thing is that he has been threatening that companies which have invested in setting up plants in in Mexico, a lot of auto majors, for instance, Japanese companies, Chinese companies are supplying auto components, etc. And then high-tech companies like Lenovo, NVIDIA, Foxconn, they have also set up base in Mexico. And the overall trade deficit is about $500 billion from these three countries that the US has. So Trump could be doing it to reduce the trade deficit. It could mean that he wants to renegotiate US MCA. And just one point I wanted to mention about China, he has said that it will be 10% additional tariffs on China, which could mean that it could be 25 plus 10, it could be 60 as he had announced during his campaign speeches, plus 10.
Yes. 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 Yes, important points made, Mr. Das Gupta. Let me come to you, Mr. Nag. Now, Mr. Das Gupta is saying that this could be his gambit or a ploy to try and get, these countries to reduce the trade deficit. But what, in your opinion, is the message that he's sending out with that tweet, and how big of a shock is this going to be if this does not really turn out to be a threat?
Well, I agree with Ambassador Das Gupta that it could be a negotiating ploy. But knowing that Mr. Trump can be sort of very unpredictable, it could be, quite frankly, just his sense of, cutting his nose to spite his face. Because, these tariffs on Mexico and Canada and also China, and as Ambassador said, these were negotiated by him in 2020. So it's going to hurt the US as well. I mean, the consumer prices in the US will also go up because, mind you, these three countries trade roughly about $1.5 trillion of goods. So, it's going to hurt, obviously, Mexico and Canada, but it will also hurt the US. It will, certainly raise prices, particularly prices on a day-to-day basis in agriculture, which is what sort of, Mr. Trump was obviously very concerned about, as everybody else is. So, I just hope it is temporary. I hope it's sort of, just a negotiating ploy, but I'm afraid that it might not have been really, quite frankly, well thought through, because it's in nobody's interest to have a trade war, which surely will follow. These countries won't just take it lying down.
Absolutely. And Mr. Nav, we've seen how currency markets have all been reacting. In fact, the European markets have also, been reacting to this news. Let me come to you, Mr. Sajjanar. It's very interesting to also note that the list of countries that he's mentioned in his social media post does not really include India. So why has he chosen not to prominently mention India, although in the past he has mentioned that India is a tariff king, and of course it's unfair so far as trade between the two countries is concerned?
If you permit, I will just want to make a very brief comment on what you've been discussing earlier. And I agree with all that has been said by the earlier panelists. But number one, of course, it is true that Trump is a very unpredictable leader. He sort of makes different threats, different claims at different times. So we'll really have to wait and see as to what he actually does when it comes to power. The second aspect that I would like to underline and emphasize is that he is a transactional leader. So, we know that last time also Trump 1.0, he made all these many threats to China. Of course, he had carried out many of these threats also, and not only against China, but against India, against the European Union, and so on and so forth. But I want to focus on China. And there what he had done is, what even the former national security advisor of the United States, who was John Bolton, who was, also U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and he was sacked by Trump. He has mentioned that in the negotiations with China, he told them that he will go soft on China if they were to increase their imports from the Midwest states' agricultural produce, because that would improve his chance of winning the elections. You would also see, the agreement that he had signed with China on the 15th or 16th of January 2020. He had been able to negotiate so that China would import $200 billion worth of goods, more of goods from the United States than it was doing earlier. And he was able to get this
Mr. Sajjanar, your point taken, but could you also respond to my question wherein I asked you, why has he not mentioned India, and how should India be reading into this social media post that has come about, and what should India be bracing for?
Yeah, no, I don't think India should take any solace that it has not been mentioned. I think he has mentioned India so many times earlier, mentioned it as the tariff king, mentioned as the worst abuser of tariffs. So I think if there is something that is going to come, we should really be prepared for it. I think we have a greater capacity now. Our economy is bigger. We should be ready to import more from the United States. If you remember, Sumita and my co-panelists will also remember, we had, even at that time, we had started importing more. We had imported more aircraft. We had imported more LNG. Now our requirements are more. We should be prepared for that. Our trade surplus with the United States has also grown. It was about 19, 20, $22 billion. Today, it is $30 billion plus. We should be prepared for that and try to get as best a deal as we possibly can with the United States. Yeah.
Right. Right. Important point made, sir. Let me come to you, Mr. Dasgupta. Mr. Dasgupta, we've had these conversations several times in the past as well during the course of the campaign when Donald Trump was, of course, calling India, a tariff king, etc., and so many other things. So, of course, like Mr. Sajjanar is mentioning, that India should not really be relieved that it's not been mentioned. But how much of an irritant do you think this tariff plan of Donald Trump is going to be in the ties between the two nations?
I think tariffs will figure very prominently, at least in the initial few months, because to President Trump's views, tariff is the main reason why other countries are taking advantage of the US, notwithstanding the fact that technology labor and other components which go into production of a product are more favorable in other countries. So he thinks that he can make America great again and bring back reshore manufacturing in the US and create jobs in the US by just raising tariffs. And so I think it is no solace, I agree entirely, that India has not been mentioned in the first salvo that he has fired. And Canada being, part of the Five Eyes, being a very, very close ally of the US in everything. If he wants to raise and he intends to carry out a 25% raising of tariffs against Canada,
Right,
because the US Mexico
right,
Canada agreement provides for
right,
zero duty access on both sides in most cases.
right, right. Right. Mr. Nag, let me come to you. I mean, when it's about India, the big question then is how should India then deal with a Trump 2.0, given that our standing is different now versus perhaps a couple of years back? And of course, India has also been reaching out to several other countries, not just in the, in the global south, but, in Europe as well, and of course in the Americas as well. How do you think India should deal with a Trump 2.0 with respect to particularly Donald Trump's plan on tariffs?
Wish I knew if our two ambassadors on the panel, my good friends, Ambassador Dasgupta and Sajjanar, won't be able to say it, nor will I. But in addition to the fact that both my colleagues have mentioned about Mr. Trump's policies being predictable, being unpredictable, sorry, what we know for sure is that he's very mercantilist in his approach. He believes in a very transactional approach, and tariffs are his tools. It's quite another matter that it is not productive. And I keep emphasizing also for the US, there may be short term gains, but in the long run, it isn't. And I think, we in India have to be prepared for this unpredictability, make sure that we diversify our sources of both exports and imports. And also, I would agree with Ambassador Sajjanar that we should proactively take steps to reduce our trade imbalance with the US. But I think in our negotiations,
Right.
we should try very hard to get services in. I mean, that has always been the issue that we have had with advanced economies, including the US, that we are good at services. We should be able to access their large market. And in return, India should be willing to import more goods. So I think India should be very proactive. And I'm sure our colleagues in the government are doing that, because we know one thing about Mr. Trump's being
Absolutely.
predictable
Absolutely. And
is
sir,
that he's
that's what
not
India
predictable.
has
And
been
we should
doing
have
so far as
contingency plans
negotiating its
for all of
FTAs with several countries are concerned, including the UK FTA, wherein India has been asking for, mutually agreeable FTA. On that note, let me come to you, Mr. Sajjanar. Now, in terms of the impact, of course, this is going to have a cascading impact if, these kind of tariffs are imposed on the global economy. This is going to lead to a global tariff war as well, and also on consumers as well in terms of escalated prices. In fact, the Canadian media says that a 10% tariff could result in $21 billion a year in economic costs. So my question is, how do you really see these countries, at least in the near term, reacting? Because these three countries have been mentioned by Donald Trump in that social media post.
Yeah, I think all of them will negotiate very hard, in my view, as far as Mr. Trump is concerned. And, we in India, of course, should be doing that. And if you recall, there was, we are very close to entering a limited trade deal with the United States. And I am of the firm view that we should definitely try to work on one, because, the United States in goods and services is our largest trading partner. And I think we should have some sort of a preferential deal with that particular partner. We have signed with Australia, we've signed with UAE, we are working very hard on UK, EU, etc. So I think the United States being the largest trading partner, we should try to do something. Of course, preserve our core interest as far as agriculture is concerned, dairy is concerned, and so on and so forth. So I think this is the way, as far as, in my view, and, I'm sure there will be other possibilities also where we could go and see what is of interest to Mr. Trump and try to assuage him and mollify him in whatever way we
Absolutely.
can. Because he's the one who's, he considers himself
Absolutely.
to be the king of the deal. And so we should be ready to make deals with him. Sumita.
Absolutely, sir. But when Donald Trump calls others, tariff king and several such terms, he really forgets that it was the United States that actually imposed high duties on items, like dairy products by 188%, on food preparations by 193%. So the question then, Ambassador Dasgupta, is can the U.S. Really afford to impose these kind of tariffs in a multipolar world?
Well, the US has single-handedly brought the dispute settlement process in the WTO to a standstill since 2019 December by not allowing the appellate body of the WTO to function. And that is one of the reasons why when he imposed unilateral tariffs on steel and aluminum products on China, India, and 5 other countries, in all of these cases, the US lost in the dispute settlement panel, the lower level, but no appeal was possible. So the US can carry on and take unilateral action as he has threatened to do. But the problem is there will be retaliation from other countries. There would be a disruption in global trade. And secondly, the US consumers will also
Absolutely.
face the
Right.
heat. So prices are going to go up over the medium term, inflation, and it is just like the 1930s when a competitive tariff war didn't lead to any good results for either the US or the European countries.
Right. Let me get that final answer going in from you, Mr. Nag. I have 2 sets of questions here. Is the WTO, practically dead so far as resolving these tariff disputes are concerned? And my second question to you really is on the China reaction that's come out. In fact, it's reacted to BBC. It's responded to BBC's set of questions. It says that it's carrying out counter-narcotics cooperation. In fact, this is one of the important common understandings that were reached between President Xi and President Biden during their meeting in San Francisco. I mean, of course, the Chinese have blinked, but is this one of the intended outcomes?
Thanks, Sumita. Let me take the first question on the future of the WTO, or is WTO dead? And I'm not saying it because Ambassador Dasgupta is on the panel and he's a good friend. First of all, no, it is not. And secondly, I've always said, when we raise questions like these, and those are understandable questions, because exactly as Dr. Dasgupta mentioned, the appellate tribunal in the WTO is non-functional because the US won't let a judge be appointed. The question in my mind always is, but will we be better off without that institution? And my answer is definitely not. So no, WTO is not dead. It certainly is facing hurdles caused by the situation. But we need a WTO. And if we didn't have a WTO, quite frankly, we'd have to invent one because, the world trade will suffer. And we can't afford to do that.
If you could respond to my second question as well, we're completely out of time.
On the second question, China's exports to USA is only 15% of the total exports. It's a large amount, but only 15%, whereas Canada, Mexico, about 75 to 80%. So I don't think China will take it lying down. And that's my concern, that China will retaliate and a trade war could follow, which is, as Ambassador Dasgupta said, is not good for anybody.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, thank you very much, gentlemen. Definitely, Donald Trump certainly has sent shockwaves across the world, made markets jittery, currency markets even more jittery. But we do hope that policies that he comes up with are rooted in practical concerns and not really knee-jerk reactions. After all, the cost of these tariffs, as gentlemen you've been speaking about, will also be borne by the US consumer itself. On that note, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on India Tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap from us right here on the show. Thanks very much for staying with us.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.